Hello and welcome to Trev Talks Tech. Here we are again, and today I want to talk about Patchbays, and I'm also going to go back. This is kind of part 3 of the Behringer mixer repair because it's all installed in place now. And if you haven't seen the other 2 videos, do go back and watch those if you like, and feel free to skip through any of the parts that you find a little bit elongated, shall we say. Do feel free to skip through. But anyway, what you'll see in that is that I've actually replaced all of the original fader sliders in this Behringer mixer with new ones, and in spite of a couple of realizations along the way, that has actually gone well, and I'm very pleased with the result. And I have actually had a chance to try it, and yes, everything seems to work perfectly well, at least for my purposes. So that's obviously not the mixer I've got here, by the way. This is a Yamaha MG10X. It's more of a DJ's mixer really than an audio studio mixer. We've got the rotary function knobs and everything, but obviously it does the same job. It does have built-in effects. Not really bothered about those, but I guess they could be useful at some point. So the reason I'm doing this particular video is to talk about Patchbays. Now, when I was actually trying to do some research on Patchbays, I must admit that there are some videos out there. Yes, of course there are, and they show you what to do and so on. But I did find that there wasn't really much about this specific Patchbay which could answer my question. And I know it might sound like a silly question to someone who's more experienced at all this, but it would have really helped me to understand this particular unit had I been able to see that somewhere on YouTube, and maybe I just wasn't looking. I'll probably feel free to comment if you know of a link that would to a YouTube that would actually have shown me the information I'm looking for. But even on Behringer's own website, it didn't seem that the very thing I was looking for didn't seem to be there. I did my own tests anyway, and that thing was, I should say, this is a Behringer PX3000 patch bay. As you can see, there are 2 of these, and having a patch bay has actually made things very easy for me around the studio. I'm just going to give you a quick look around here for those who've not seen the setup before, and those who may have seen my videos and know that I was actually changing everything every 5 minutes, and I do keep changing things around and back with me. If I just, there we go, I'm just going to pull the focus out, or the zoom out, so you can see better. So that's the setup here. So there's all the small synths and things like that there. And it goes around to here where I've got my old 2009 iMac, still using Logic Pro on here for Logic Pro 9 from back in the day when the 2009 iMac was the latest in modern technology. And I do have next to it there a refurbished Dell PC using the Gadget Center's service there for a Dell PC, which has an upgraded processor, memory, and storage drive, and it's been sort of just generally cleaned and done. And apart from one little thing I had to sort out myself, reseating the RAM, because I was getting startup errors occasionally. Apart from having to do that, it's been absolutely fine and dandy. I do recommend that save a laptop from landfill, and do think about buying a refurbished laptop that suits your needs rather than going out and buying the very latest thing. This machine here is 17 years old and it's still doing the thing that I need it to do. Do you really need all those extra add-ons that you might get from a more modern door? Really? Maybe not. Or maybe you do. It's everyone's preference anyway. Anyway, I digress. Down here, oops, that's the bumping about. Down here is the mixer. I'm just going to zoom back in there for a moment. And there's the mixer. sitting down here. It's sitting underneath the main sort of MIDI keyboard, and I've got a couple of pictures I've taken. I'll mix these into the video, and this is all plugged in. That I've got a multi-core quarter-inch jack assembly on there, and some lovely smooth faders. Oh, there's almost some ASMR quality about being able to slide those faders up and down, and yeah, and then there's just the feel of them is so much better. Okay, so that's a little, so bringing all this together, the problem I had, just to bring you back and to move you around, now the problem I had was that I've got gear on this side, that, as you saw, the modular system, and there's stuff under the desk for the modular as well, and then there's the semi-modular stuff, and then we've got modules and the little mini Nova keyboard, and then all this stuff around here. And the problem is, that's all around there, and I've got other stuff around here. We've got all the door stuff, and also there are times when I've got other things I want to bring out here. So there's some small devices like the Electron Digitac 2, the Teenage Engineering OP1, all these other odds and ends that I want to bring out here. And I'm the sort of person, to be honest with you, that doesn't like to keep having to chop and change things. If you've seen any of my videos, that might surprise you. But what I've been trying to achieve is as optimum an arrangement as possible that requires as little modification as possible, depending on what project I want to do. And it also, before I had Patchbay, the other thing I was concerned about is always having available channels on the mixer, on this mixer, on the Behringer mixer that I've worked on. And that's been an absolute pain, not wanting to chop and change things too much. There's also to think about the length of the cables. A lot of the cables I had just wouldn't reach all the way from one side to the other. So that meant, well, where do I put the mixer? And doesn't that mean the mixer has to be in the middle? And that's not always convenient because it takes up a lot of real estate on the desk. And once I've set it, I want to ignore it. This one's a little bit different. But yeah, they are where they are now anyway. And of course I want the computer screen here. Now that's obviously not attached to the Apple Mac over there. This one does things like run the Arteria Analog Lab and it runs all the utilities for the other VSTs and things for all the other kit that's here. So I kind of like that to be center stage, and then over to the left there is the door. But trying to get all these things to talk to each other either means having an awful lot of long leads. I'm really running out of space. So the Patchbay has been an absolute godsend. I'm just going to a little bit closer to the action there now. So what is it about the Patchbay? Well, I'll put up some pictures in the video that sort of help to explain this. The Patchbay is a way to connect from everywhere all the devices that have outputs, and put them in the same place as all the devices that have inputs. And of course, many devices have both. So they all end up being represented as a socket on the front of here. Now, of course, on the back of the Patchbay is where all the inputs and outputs from these different devices are connected on the whole. That one, you can plug other things straight into the front, and that's of course one of the things it's meant to do. The patch part, of course, comes from being able to connect various devices to each other. So I'm just going to do that now. I've got some patch cables here, and the first thing I'm actually going to do in a moment is to connect up my speakers. So I actually got the speakers that running through this as well. Now it should be recognized that all of these sockets are actually meant to be individual from each other. So there shouldn't be any kind of earthing problems between them. Although at the moment, I'm not sure if it's audible, but there is actually a bit of hum coming from the speakers here, and that's because at the moment they're actually not connected to anything. I will put up a picture very often of what I've got here that explains how I know what plugs in where. So this is my Patchbay table, and this is obviously how I know what goes where. I cannot recommend enough building or producing a Patchbay table. Obviously, it's going to help you recognize what goes where. And it also means you can structure these. Now, there is a general convention with Patchbays, which is that the output from a device plugs in the back along the top row, and the inputs back to devices plug in underneath. So I can take the output from any of these patch out from any of the outputs into any of the inputs. And obviously to do that, I could plug in a cable from an output to an input. But if there always had to be lots of cables plugged in between these to make it work, that would be an awful lot of cables. So Patchbays are actually designed that to be able to deal with that by having a sort of default setting. And there's three ways that this can be done. We've got what we call normal, half normal, and through settings, and it works like this. The convention says it's not obligatory, of course, but the convention says that outputs should go along the top row and inputs along the bottom row for each of the Patchbays you have. Now I've got two Patchbays here, so I've got outputs and inputs, and mostly outputs with a couple of exceptions, and then inputs underneath. Like I say, it's not obligatory. It's only at the end of the day a cross connection facility, but that tends to be the norm in sort of studio setups from everything I've seen. Right, so as you can see from this, I've got at the Patchbay table, I've got my 1A and 1B. So the A is the top row and B is the bottom row, and I've actually labeled them myself 1 and 2, 1A, 1B, 2A and 2B. And all I need to do now is just I've got a list of what goes in where. So for example, the speakers that the Yamaha speakers here are by default above that. You'll see the air outputs, that's the M audio at air 192 output, and by default these go to each other. I don't have to plug in a patch cable to get the output at the top to go into the input at the bottom. So automatically you could say my M audio interface is going straight to the speakers, and so that's all happening without me plugging in a connection. However, if I do what I intend to do just now, and I'm going to plug the output of the mixer into the input of the speakers by cross patching that, then I'm actually diverting the stream across. In normal, what happens is that the output by default will go to the input, but if I plug anything into one of the outputs, that will cut it off from the corresponding input. Likewise, if I plug anything into the input side, that will cut off the output from it. So you're basically, it's a straightforward diversion to somewhere else. And that's called the normal situation. I guess it's probably the most common and is the most appropriate for a lot of things. But that doesn't always work. Sometimes, if you want to plug in, if you've got an output that goes straight to an input, for example, I've got here a mini disc deck in here, and its outputs are by default going to another M audio interface, this Fast Track Pro interface I have, and that then is designed to be plugged into the Tasty Chips granular synthesizer. But that is the default situation. Now I might also want to monitor the output of the mini disc by plugging it into a couple of mixer channels that are handy on somewhere else on this setup. So in this setup, I've got what's referred to as half normal. So when I plug in to a channel, it maintains the connection to the output underneath it, sorry, the input underneath it. But it would also add the output of this. I can then take that output to somewhere else as well. So it effectively allows me to split the output into two different places. But having said that, if I wanted to plug something else into those inputs, I've had another sound source I wanted to take into the GR1, then I could take that from anywhere, any other output. Let's say I wanted to take it from, I don't know, the mod wave for some reason or whatever. I could take the outputs from there and plug it directly into the Fast Track Pro input, and that would go straight in, but it would cut off anything else. It would not permit the mini disc output to go straight to that input. So and that's what kind of reinforces the outputs on top, inputs underneath idea. So I've got some other things. I've got the Behringer mixer's output, alternate outputs that some are actually going to the mini disc's inputs. So I can actually sample and record certain passages on mini disc, a little bit of lo-fi, real lo-fi recording across. And then if I wanted to, I could then cross relate that out and into the Fast Track Pro, possibly even on the fly, although I tend to prefer to record things and then send them out separately. So that's normal and half normal. And the last of these in the green area, this is the through connections. So in the through connections, there is no direct connection at any time between the output side and the input side. So anything that's plugged in the back comes through to the front, but it has no automatic connection to anything underneath, and vice versa. So along the top here, I've got mostly outputs that coming out. I've got the output from the MS20 synth, the ring modulator pedal, that the Nanoverb 2 output is there. That I've got the Behringer D's outputs, and I've got a couple of sends there. I've also got the Behringer mixer's headphone output, so I can just plug my headphones conveniently into that rather than having to go and plug in down at the mixer itself. It just puts it nice and up here on the desk. But I don't want any of those things to automatically plug into the inputs underneath. I don't want mixer aux sends plugging straight into channel 1 and 2 of the same mixer, for example, and I don't want the outputs of the Nanoverb effects unit going straight into its own inputs. But I do want those represented somewhere, connected somewhere on the Patchbay. So therefore, these connections here are not are through output, straight through, with no internal connections. Now you set this on this particular unit. You can set that by switches, and I'll stick some photos up on the video, by switches, slider switches, which are on top of the unit. It's a bit inconvenient because you have to actually then pull the unit with all its wiring out of the rack, but it's reasonably accessible. With some equipment, you actually have to do that on a channel by channel basis on the individual insert in the Patchbay. And conversely, in some equipment, you can actually just flick a switch on the very front of the Patchbay, which is incredibly convenient. And you obviously you might pay more for a Patchbay that makes it that easy to configure. But once you've actually decided what you want where, it's not that difficult. You don't tend to make that many changes, and if you do, it's not really that difficult to do if you really have to. So that's a good look at the Patchbay table. This is just a table in the Libra, which I use instead of Microsoft. That I used to use the Libra open source project, which works very well and does exactly what it says on the tin. I have a printed copy of this table as well. The printed copy I keep by the laptop, so I don't have to leave this on screen because I want other things on screen. Okay, so that's a little explanation of the Patchbay table. And I'm going to pull out now, and we'll have a look at the wider picture of things. Okay, so here I am back again, and let's have a look at the setup. So I've just, for interest's sake, I've got my little Mini Freak keyboard here. Now I know that the Mini Freak keyboard, it comes out on 1A, 13 and 14, and by default it goes to the Yamaha mixer here on channels 5 and 6. Incidentally, this also means I don't have to keep putting bits of tape all over the mixer. I can just refer to this for everything. It does seem to work. For me, that's worked very well. Now, for the moment, I'm not using any of the other kit, and all I want to do is just monitor what's coming out of the mixer into my speakers. So I'm going to take my two channels here. These L-shaped ones aren't the best for Patchbays, but never mind. I'm going to take the output from which is 1A7, and I'm going to plug that into my left monitoring speaker, which is on there on 1B1, and I'm going to take 1A8 and I'm going to plug that into 1B2, and already I think the actual noise has gone down. So let's just find a nice there we go. All right, so it's a bit of messing about, and that's because it's coming through the it's coming through the Mini Freak outputs. The Mini Freak outputs to the Patchbay are in positions 13 and 14 on the A unit, and they are going straight into the Yamaha mixer on channels 5 and 6, which happens to be a stereo pair. There you go. And it's nice to be able to know that and to be able to see it straight away. This mixer does allow me then to throw in effects if I want to, but like I say, I'm not going to do that right now. So that makes it ever so easy to plug things together. In a similar vein, if I wanted, I've decided I want to use the, I don't know, I could take something else, such as I could take the output of the mini disc. Remember, I said the output of the mini disc, and if I wanted to listen to the output of the mini disc on a separate input, currently that's not going anywhere I can listen to it. So I know I'm going to take a couple of patch cables here. So, and I'm going to take my mini disc output, left output, and I'm going to plug that I'm going to plug that into where the multi-poly currently goes. I don't want the multi-poly right now, so if I go into B15 and then I do a similar thing with the other channel of the mini disc, I'm going Bravo 16. Now that in turn is channels 7 and 8, so that I can now play the output of this sample sets April 2025. There you go, and that's just me messing about with xylophone, full 2 octaves. So I was just creating some sample sets here to put onto the granular synth, but I'm now listening to that because I've made that connection. Let's just turn that down. Sounds a bit like a children's program at the moment. Okay, And so that's how it works. That's the beauty of using a Patchbay. It really is as straightforward as that, and you can bring everything together in one place and treat it like your own little telephone exchange. Now, the one thing that I wasn't taught about the Patchbay system is so about this particular Patchbay as well, is about whether or not these jacks are stereo or mono. And that might be obvious to experienced people out there. If you're doing a face palm right now, sorry, but it's not always apparent to all of us that whether or not these things are the case. Most times when you see a 1/4-inch jack anywhere near a piece of technology like this, it's a mono jack. Everything else, all the outputs from this, all the other kit, the only stereo jack that is used, more or less anywhere, is for headphones, which obviously makes sense. But anywhere else, everything is mono. So why would I assume that the inputs to this are mono? Well, there is a bit of a clue, because it turns out that these are described as balanced inputs, and actually they have a ground, which is the ring. They also, which is the actual sleeve, the main sort of body of this part of the plug. They have a middle ring, and then they have the tip. And for balance connections, the hot and cold, you're using the tip and the ring, and the sleeve is the ground. And that makes perfect sense, but it's not that obvious. Now, I haven't set this up to make use of the fact that these are actually stereo jacks. In fact, I've got a number of connections to the back of this which are stereo jacks, but they're plugging into mono connections, so I'm kind of wasting one of the wires there. If I wanted to make more space on this Patchbay, I could actually have loads of adapters that turn each of these effectively into a stereo connection, and then I could double up on the number of channels if I didn't mind 2 channels going around together. That's particularly true when you have stereo inputs to the mixer. I could definitely make use of that in that situation. It would, but I'd have to remember at this end, of course, that I'd need to split those out into 2 separate channels, especially if I'm going into an instrument like this. So I've not done that. I've just have 2 Patchbays, and I'm treating them like mono connections. It seems a perfectly reasonable way forward. Now, I seem to have lost, just because I've turned it down. No. But what's going on there? That's interesting. I seem to have lost my output to this. Now, why would that be? Don't think I'm doing anything differently. Nope, it's not on account of my connection. Oh, that's curious. Okay, so we see what's going on here. But I've got it's definitely connected through there, and the mixer connections are still in place here. So what have I done? I think it just was the keyboard itself just got tired of waiting for me to do something. There we go. So there you go. So that's the benefit of having a Patchbay or 2, and it's transformed this particular setup because now I can do what I like. And of course, if I'm not using a particular unit, let's get something out of the drawer here that I might want to connect, and I've got a few items to choose from, let's say. But if I wanted to connect, let's say, this Digitat, then what I could do at this point is to just bring this in, and obviously I've got the individual outputs on the back. Again, individual left and right sockets. Of course there are, you know, that's what you'd expect. But I could now choose, if I just get the cable to do it with, I could now choose, I'm not going to plug in the whole thing right now, but if I wanted to put this into, well, I could use spare channels on the Behringer mixer, or I could go, I want to go in, I'm not using the multi-poly again, I could go into 15 and 16, well, on the input side, which goes to the mixer, and obviously I can just plug that straight through into the Digitac here, into the outputs. Obviously I'd need to put the power supply and everything. I want to put my MIDI connections on. I've got some MIDI connections, MIDI connections hiding under here for when I need them. But they're just under there, so I've got a couple of cables I can access if I want to add any additional MIDI control in. And here it is. So that is now going to be on those 2 channels, and it's just so easy. It means that I feel able to actually keep the smaller devices out of the way if I'm not using them. And at the moment, that's quite often. I'm still playing with all the bigger stuff, if you see what I mean. Although this will probably make a comeback pretty soon, but it's not going to take up all the space all the time on the front here. Right, so that's the bit about Patchbay, and I hope that has been of interest to some of you. You tell me about your setup. What do you do? Do you use Patchbay? What's your setup like? Is this, you know, possibly a useful way to go if you've not currently got that set up? I guess there is a critical mass of equipment at which point it becomes useful to have a Patchbay, even if it's just the one, and it lets you just easily go between mixers and things. As I say, the only problem I have noticed, and again, any comments most welcome, the only problem I have noticed with this, there may be a little bit more earthiness going around. Now there shouldn't as such be any connections here, but of course multiple connections from instruments to the mixer or stuff like that, there may be some unintended consequences about you know, earth loops and things like that going about the place. So there is a little bit of that, but for the now it's livable. It's not my biggest problem, not by any means. Okay, let's refocus on the Behringer mixer and have a look at how that's working now. So what I've done here, just very quickly, is I've taken the Mini Freak outputs from A13 and 14 of the Patchbay, and I've plugged it into the 2B. It's got into 7 and 8. Now 7 and 8 are channels 1 and 2 on the Behringer mixer which you saw earlier. That's running down here, and I've got those 2 channels turned up. Now, as I mentioned, obviously, the problem with the resistors on these faders is that they are linear and not logarithmic. Now, of course, decibels are a logarithmic function, and so you could say I've messed up the decibel setting on this. It doesn't represent the actual dB value. But at the end of the day, do we listen to decibels or do we listen to the right volume coming from the right source? Do we listen to the musicality of it, or do we listen to, oh, that's 0 dB or -3 or whatever? So for my purposes at least, as I'm not trying to do any precise sound measurement here, that running them at various sources through this mixer and just setting up the volume controls accordingly, that works for me. Of course, the input volume is going to have a bearing on what the actual levels are and all sorts. So okay, I'm sure again that there may be some audio engineers face palming out there. Oh, for God's sake, you need this or you know, or whatever. But that works for my setup, and it means that this mixer is going to be usable for many years in the future. But there it is. We saw this on test in one of the previous videos, if you've watched that, and I've just literally, and you can hardly see me doing that, but I'm moving up and down the faders on there, and it works just fine. So there you go. I won't prolong this any further. So that's a little bit about Patchbays. So the PX3000 quarter-inch 24-way or 48-way Patchbay, pairs of 24 pairs of input and output times 2. That's what I'm using in my setup. They are stereo, as it were. They are 2-channel headphone tip ring sleeve type quarter-inch jacks. So they can be used for balanced inputs and outputs if you do that through a jack. I always associate balanced connections with XLR, but I know that's not always the case, clearly. But yeah, I'm using it just for the mono connections that appear from various equipment, and so I'm not utilizing it perhaps to its full capability, and I may be costing myself a little bit of mains hum or something in some places. Unfortunately, these are, again, these one thing I did do is these multi-way quarter jack cables that are on the mixer here, they are actually stereo ones, and again I'm just ignoring one of the connections there, and it may be causing a bit more coupling and a bit more hum than I would like, but unless it becomes a real problem, I'm not going to bother too much with that. Okay, so thanks for watching. I hope that's been useful, and I'll see you in another video. Have a good one.